Hi there, I'm your host Marlene McConnell and welcome to the Surviving Trauma Stories of Hope podcast. In this week's episode, I'm excited to welcome Sarah Westbrook to the podcast, and she joins me from her home in Missouri in the United States. Sarah is the founder of Westbrook Counseling Services and Daisy Girl Communications. As a trauma survivor herself, she understands the work that goes into healing. She helps her clients work through their pain to achieve lasting results, laughing along the way and becoming their most authentic selves. A national certified counselor and a member of the American Counseling Association, Sarah entered clinical practice as a professional counselor in 2014. With a Master of Science in Mental Health Counseling from Walden University and focused continued education in trauma-informed therapy, the Gottman Method, DBT and CBT, she provides individual therapy, couples and family counseling, and weekend psychoeducational training courses. After a dysfunctional and abusive Mormon upbringing, Sarah left the religion and began her journey to heal from CPTSD and the religious trauma of her childhood. She shares her story of surviving personality disordered parents and her faith transition, along with advice for healing from toxic cult-like religious systems. She also hosts a podcast called Raising Crazy, Growing Up to Show Up, where she offers psychoeducation for parents and caregivers. After traveling the US as an army wife and mother of 7, now 8, Sarah and her family put down roots in central Missouri. It has been my pleasure to have Sarah join me, and I know you will enjoy this episode. Thank you to my listeners for joining me on this journey. Comment on the posts on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and let me know what you think of this episode. Also head to Amazon.com and takelot.com and get your copy of my book, Ray of Light, and please leave me a rating and review. It would mean the world to me. Also, please check out my website and download your free journal prompt and relaxing meditation on the resources page. As always, stay tuned and keep listening. Hi, good day, Sarah. Welcome to the Surviving Trauma Stories of Hope podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Marlene.
It's so lovely to have you here. I'm all the way out in Cape Town, going into summer, and you're all the way out in the US, headed into winter.
Yes, winter is here.
Yeah.
It's been
I
very
think one
cold.
of the things that I admire most about being in the US this time of year is Thanksgiving that's looming. And secondly, a white Christmas, because we've got very hot Christmases on our side.
I did spend one Christmas in Hawaii once, and it was a little surreal. Like it messed with my psyche just a little bit. And the white Christmas is kind of a misnomer in the United States. You've got to be pretty far north to get the consistent white Christmas. Where I've lived, we get muddy Christmas. It's been raining and it's cold and it's icy, but it's usually not beautiful. It's usually pretty sludgy and gross. But yes, Hawaii was nice. I just had to get through this, Santa Claus in shorts on a surfboard with his bag of presents. So
I must say, it's a different experience in the, in Hawaii and then also in the Southern Hemisphere,
Yes.
But yes, welcome again. And thank you so much for joining me. Today, I wanted for us just to have a conversation around your new book, Trauma Bonded, which has really wonderful reviews. So congratulations. And
thank you.
And I also wanted us to, sort of have the listeners get to know you a bit better, the woman behind the book, and sort of touch on your personal story. And then, through the work that you do, Sarah, you have so much to offer in nuggets and teachings for the listeners that I thought I could pick your brain and maybe get someone out there the much needed guidance that they need.
Absolutely. I love a good brain picking. Makes me think and I love it. So,
Okay.
sounds great.
So, I mean, your story starts essentially from a very young age as a child, growing up in a home
Mhm.
with your parents, but not only just any parents, parents that had mental health issues, as well as a very religious environment. I think that when we grow up in religious environments, it's one of two things. It either is a very good experience that shapes us into something good, or the experience is so overwhelming and leaves us so afraid to live life because we're so scared about, breaking any of the rules in the religion, that it becomes a very fearful childhood when it's the teachings are that rigid. And so maybe you could sort of kick us off and enlighten us just a little bit more about that
Yeah.
personal story.
Yeah, absolutely. So in my personal story, it's funny. I was born and raised in the Mormon religion. They don't really like to be called Mormons anymore. About 3-4 years ago, they got really they got some different counsel from their leader, and now the term Mormon, I guess, is somewhat offensive. So we're talking about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is based in Salt Lake City, Utah. And so when I was really little, when my story opens, you see that my mom is like the one that's super religious, and my dad is kind of rebellious against it because he's not much of a rule follower. And I actually get that from my dad. I'm kind of this rule doesn't make sense, so let me push
Mm-hmm.
against it a little bit. Hopefully, I do that in healthier ways than what was modeled
Yes.
for me. But I grew up in this environment with my mom, like lording over my father, like, you need to fix these things so that our family looks better. It was very much about appearances.
Mm-hmm.
And that very much about appearances and the opinions of people on the outside looking at our family and thinking that we were perfect, Mormons, that the children were always well behaved, that we were incredibly academically intelligent, that our athletics and our music endeavors, they all had to be perfect.
Mm.
And so what ends up happening for a lot of these high demand religions, and I'm going to use the term Mormon because that's the one I grew up with,
Mm-hmm.
and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is just a mouthful to say over and over and over again.
Yes.
So in my upbringing in that high demand religious environment, like you said, there were a lot of rules. I saw a Facebook meme recently that was like the 1,636 something. I'm making that number up there,
Yes.
but it was an astronomical number of Mormon rules. And I like read through them, and I just stop at about 150 because I was overwhelmed. I was like, yup, yup, yup. And I was like, okay, I got to stop because this is
Oh, wow.
overwhelming. But growing up in that Mormon environment with all these rules that you had to follow in order to reach existential exaltation and live with God again with your family, and then you combine that with my family dynamic of we have to look the best and be the best. What it turned out for me was that I had to be perfect to be loved. And when I wasn't performing in the way that was expected for me, love was withdrawn. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's really hard for me to divide those lines between where the religious upbringing ended and my parents' narcissism and borderline began, to really pull that apart. My father ended up jumping on the Mormon bandwagon right around my 8th birthday, and his reason was he was not going to be allowed to baptize me into the Mormon faith. So Mormons baptize their children into the faith when they're 8 years old. If you were born and raised Mormon, it's rare for children to not have been baptized at age 8. It's just a religious milestone. It's a rite of passage
Mm-hmm.
type thing.
Okay.
And
I did not know
my
that.
dad, they claim that your 8-year-old is making a choice. But from a neuroscience perspective, we know that 8-year-olds are not really cognizant of being able to understand the choice and the quote unquote covenants that they're making with God and to the church. Like they don't get it. And there's so much outside pressure. It's not really a choice.
Yes.
I have friends that are very much into that religion that look at it as, we encourage the choice and then they grow into the covenants as they get older. And for me, I'm just like, yeah, this feels a little icky. I'm on the outside of that religion now, so it feels a little icky. But for
Mm-hmm.
my dad, it was very much nobody else is going to baptize my daughter, Sarah. And a lot of that is because if the dad doesn't baptize the child, then there's a lot of community pressure of, oh, what did the dad do that makes him not worthy? And so it was right before my 8th birthday that my dad started attending the Sunday meetings and the Wednesday meetings and the leadership meetings on a regular basis so that he could be quote unquote worthy enough to baptize me. And then I'm the oldest of 4. And so he stayed active. And to this day, like from the time I was right before my 8th birthday until today, I'm 42, almost 43. He has been active in that Mormonism. And it's like he adopted that. So, but prior to my 8th birthday, he was sometimes active, sometimes not, usually pretty rebellious in the Mormon setting. And then before my
Mm-hmm.
8th birthday, he made like a 180 flip. And it was, I am Mormon. I am all the way Mormon. And now I'm going to use all of these rules to keep my family in line and doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. So yeah.
Wow. As I'm listening to you, I keep hearing in my mind, it's the perception. It's the perception. And I think, what you've described is that was what your mom was saying. Your mom was
Yes.
saying, like, we need to be seen in a certain light if we are going to be in the church. And that's exactly then
Yes.
what your father did. He basically joined her. But then, Sarah, when your father decided to become
Yes.
active in the Mormon religion and in the Mormon church, how did that start to impact your upbringing in your daily life at home?
Yeah. Well, in the beginning, I loved it because when I was really little, my dad is an amazing storyteller and he does really well with young, obedient children. And please know they need to be young. They need to be obedient. If they're not obedient, he doesn't do so good anymore. And I was definitely a child. I wanted to please my parents. I wanted to be good. I needed that approval, which is developmentally appropriate. And they took advantage of that, but I was too young to know. So in the beginning, I loved it, mostly because, he went from doing whatever he wanted on Sundays to joining Mormonism, which is it's 3 hours of service. That's like, or at that time, it was 3 hours of official service time on a Sunday and all of these other things that we had to do. And has never done well just sitting still. He's a very active individual. Like he's got to move. He's in his late 60s now and he still rides his bicycle, 6 to 12 miles a day. He loves to hike. He has hiked the Grand Canyon in Arizona. It's called Rim to Rim. I think it's 22 miles. And he's hiked that
Mm-hmm.
almost every summer with my brother. So, he's a very physically active, healthy individual in that way. And
Wow.
so sitting in 3 hours of church was very difficult for him. And so what he would do is he would pinch us until we cried, or he'd nudge us and be like, you need to go to the bathroom. Let's go to the bathroom. And, Mom, I've got to go to the bathroom. I can't hold it. And so he would take us out and then he would, out of the main meeting. So in Mormonism, the children are in the main meeting the entire time that the adults are. So they don't separate us from our parents until everybody is separated. So it's a 1 hour, very boring meeting. It's called sacrament meeting. That would be similar to like a Catholic mass type of a meeting. And so he would pinch us.
That is so
we
challenging for kids.
Yes. And you're supposed to be quiet. You're supposed to not wiggle very much. You have to be very what we call reverent.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was an expectation that is not developmentally appropriate for young children. But that's what we were supposed to do. So my dad would find all kinds of ways to anger us gently and subtly so that we could leave, and then we'd go play in the hallways to take a break, or we'd go for a walk, and he would tell us stories. So in the beginning, it was really fun.
Yeah.
But then as I entered adolescence, things really shifted in adolescence for me. So,
okay.
Did you want me to speak about that a little bit?
Yes, because I think the way I understand your story is that your parents had the mental health issues, which they then used to control the family. And I surmise that there came a point in your life, Sarah, where you said, I am an individual and I would like to make individual choices. And as with any teenager, we explore, we meet, we have friends, we have girlfriends, we have boyfriends. When you reach that age of young adolescence and engaging with friends and boyfriends, and change your view in any way about the religion and about this controlling environment that you found yourself in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in order to illustrate the point, I need to give some context about Mormonism. So in the Mormon faith, when Mormonism was founded, shortly after that, I don't know, 10 years after that or something, Joseph Smith introduced the principle of polygamy. And then Joseph Smith didn't follow any of his own rules around polygamy. So we've got a book of scripture in Mormonism called the Doctrine and Covenants. In the beginning, it was the Book of Commandments. And Joseph Smith had basically asserted in these books of scripture that in order to obtain the highest degree of the highest heaven, you needed to practice polygamy. But in this life, it was only practiced to raise up seed unto God. So basically, we're practicing polygamy so that we can create more babies for God and build the kingdom of God on the earth again today. Subsequently, statistics do not follow that logic. The only person in a polygamous relationship who ends up with more children is the daddy. But if you look at how many children overall the women have, you actually end up with more children if you're in monogamous childbearing relationships. That's just the statistic there, and you can see that illustrated quite a bit. But there was also the culture in the 1800s where women were the property of their husbands. And if you look at early Mormon leadership, you can see that women were viewed as the property of their quote unquote priesthood leader. Priesthood leaders, so the priesthood in Mormonism means that you have the permission and authority to use God's power on earth. And so the literal belief is, if I say this goes and I'm saying that God told me this, then it's as good as if God said, and then fill in the blank, whatever it is. And so a priesthood healing blessing would be, the men surrounding a circle and they pronounce a blessing of healing upon an ill person. And that's basically, as long as the person who received the blessing has enough faith, then that's as if God said, be healed. Like, think Jesus performing miracles in the New Testament. Like, that is the literal belief. And what's really funny is, again, let's look at statistics. If that was a real thing, then in these highly populated Mormon communities, like let's say Utah, it would make sense to then believe that they have a lower incidence of death from cancer and diseases coming in and a lower incidence of child mortality and these things. And if you look at those statistics, they're pretty much the same as everywhere else in the world, that the same number of people are struggling with this. My point in answering your question is that even in the Mormon temples, up until about 18 months ago, the woman still covenanted and promised that she would obey her husband as long as her husband was following the counsel from God that he received through his priesthood authority. So basically, the covenant went something along the lines of, you covenant to obey and honor and sustain your husband as he honors and sustains the Father, meaning God. And so even though Mormons today would say, no, men and women are equal, you've got to look at this history of the woman belongs to the man. And in Mormonism today, we still believe in polygamy in the afterlife. And so with that kind of context, where things really went sideways for me in my upbringing is that, number one, my father has always struggled with narcissism and borderline. And so it has to be his way or no way. He's always right, no matter what. If you don't do it his way, he will go out of his way to either discredit you or force you into doing things his way. He was very good at gaslighting people, and he's very good at poking people's buttons in such a way that they would have a big chaotic emotional response. And then he would back off and be like, look how crazy they are. Yeah, you cannot trust them. Like, he would destroy other people's credibility.
Oh, I don't like when people do that.
Oh, it's awful. It is a
so
horrible.
Awful.
And it's hard to prove in court. So you have, and it's hard to prove in general because they are very, very good at it.
And they always turn the tables.
Yes.
You know, the unsuspected one always comes up as the mad person.
Yes. And I'm the Lee family scapegoat in my family. And so, like, when I didn't fall in line and comply, then my father used that against my siblings, as in, look at how crazy Sarah is. This is what happens when you don't listen to us. You don't want to be like Sarah. And so even today, I can't have a relationship with my siblings because my siblings have to choose, or my mother, because my siblings basically have to choose between my father and me. And if you don't choose my father, your life becomes a living hell. And they know that because they've seen what he's done to me. But if you ask them, they're going to tell you, oh, it's Sarah who's the crazy one. It's Sarah who's making things up. It's Sarah. And so we start seeing this scapegoat pattern when I'm really little, because I'm, in the book you discover, I'm very hypersexual, more so than a child should be at my age of development, because I would act out in sexual ways as a very young child in public. That's, of course, very embarrassing. And so then I'm like, it's like, something's wrong with Sarah, and oh, this is Sarah's fault. And oh, all of the, like, my brother looked at pornography. That's Sarah's fault because she masturbated in public when she was 3. It doesn't make a lot of sense, the conclusions that they draw, but that is what happens. And so as I'm entering my preteen, teenage years, where it's natural for kiddos to give some pushback to their parents, it's natural for kiddos to value their peer relationships over their family relationships, and we start making our own conclusions and figuring things out, I start identifying in that age period, dad isn't always right. And hey, this doesn't actually make as much sense, but I can't push against my father. And so where this really shows up is that, number one, my mom, who is covert narcissist, is struggling with toxic perfectionism, probably from her own upbringing. And then you combine that with this need to be seen as perfect of Mormonism. She's now developed what we call scrupulosity, which is religious OCD. And this is a concept that John Dehlin really expounded on in his doctoral dissertation. He's a psychology PhD, and he really talks about how high demand religions create religious OCD, and he terms that. I don't know if he coined the term or if he just better developed the term, but he calls that scrupulosity. So I've got a mom who her own personal characteristics are very much perfectionism.
This is fascinating. This is the first time I hear of a scrupulosity. I've never actually heard of it. I've never come across it. I mean, I'm in many ways glad that now you can actually put a name to that, Sarah, to understand your mom better.
Right. I'm following all these rules. I'm doing things in this very ritualistic way, and I'm doing so to be righteous enough, to be good enough, to be free of sin enough to get to heaven. And it doesn't matter what else is going on in the outside world or how much sense it does not make. I'm still going to continue to do it because of the religious demand, because of the religious teaching. So yeah, we see very similar behaviors in scrupulosity that you do in traditional OCD. And what a lot of people don't understand about OCD is an extreme form of anxiety. And it is, I have to do these things or my entire world will fall apart. That's kind of if we were to kind of, let's give a one sentence, cover up for what OCD it is. If I don't perform these rituals or do things in this specific way, and then I've got all these obsessive thoughts that I cannot stop thinking about. And if I stop thinking about them, or if I don't perform these rituals, my world will end. Something horrible is going to happen. You see that in Mormonism, where Mormonism has been identified kind of as a sex cult, not because they're doing really icky things sexually, although some people are, but because they focus so much on rules and regulations and behaviors surrounding sex that your obsessive thoughts are, I have to dress a certain way so that men don't look at me and get aroused. I have to do certain things in order to be clean. If a boy gets aroused, it's my fault, but I'm also not allowed to tell a boy no, because then I'm going to dash his priesthood hopes and dreams to shreds. I'm going to get married very, very quickly because I can't have sex before I get married. Otherwise, I'm unworthy to go to the temple, and then my family won't last forever into the heavens. And so there's a lot of pressure around sexual performance, and when things are okay and when things are not okay, and how our body looks, and how I'm supposed to dress and how I'm supposed to behave to be what they call modest, but really it's very oppressive sexual rules. They're really, some of them make sense, and that's why they get their credibility, because it's like, yes, I want to make sure that I'm ready and in a good place in a relationship, but then it takes it just an extra step further where it becomes toxic. So it's like this healthy idea, but then we push it and shove it and force it to the point where it's no longer safe. And so what happened for me is, as I engaged in normal teenage sexual exploration with my boyfriends and, the kissing and those types of things, once those things were discovered, my father took that I'm the priesthood leader and Sarah is my daughter, therefore she is my property, and I have a duty to control everything that she does and what is thought about her in order to, quote unquote, save her. But really his motivation is to not lose face. We see everything about my life crumble into very traumatic incidences that have then followed me and affected my attachments moving forward.
I'm so sorry.
So my book is Trauma Bonded, a true story of navigating attachments forged in complex PTSD. Because as you read through my childhood, you see the chronic childhood abuse and neglect, especially emotional neglect and some physically abusive issues and lots of sex. So content
Yeah.
warning on that in the book. But then moving forward, as I've developed into an adulthood and into my relationship with a very healthy man who I love deeply, you can see the pattern of Sarah has unresolved trauma. Her attachment style is very fear-based. It's very disorganized. There's a lot of emotion dysregulation going on for me due to the overt control. So my father basically held me captive in my home after he found out that I was sexually active. I was 16. My boyfriend was 18. And he held me captive in my own home. He called all of my friends. He destroyed my friendship
Yeah.
relationships on purpose to isolate
Oh,
me. Like it's pretty
yes.
nasty. And then how that affected me moving forward and how that led to a marital affair later in life with that same high school sweetheart, because he and I have a shared trauma
Mm-hmm.
bond. And then I have a abuse victim trauma bond with my
Yeah.
parents. And so I really work hard to illustrate that not all trauma bonds are unhealthy, that you can have very positive things come
Mm-hmm.
from trauma
Yeah.
bonds, but also how they show up in our attachments in all areas of our life. It's shown up in my attachments as a mother. It's shown up in my attachments as a colleague. It's shown
Mm-hmm.
up in my attachments with my husband. It's shown up in my attachments with my high school sweetheart.
Mm-hmm.
It's shown up in my attachments with my parents. And so the book is really about identifying that
Mm-hmm.
and then overcoming it and choosing to make the concerted effort to do better and show up better in your relationships, because these attachments are healable,
Mm-hmm.
but not fast healable. I think that sometimes we're like, oh, I can see where I'm
Yeah.
struggling. So now that I know I should do better. And really our neurobiology is not wired for us to make a change that rapidly. It takes a long time, but you can do it.
Yes.
And that's really what I wanted to show in the book, that, hey, look at all my ugly spots. Like I did not filter my ugliness and the
I
icky
like
things
that.
that I did. But I wanted to demonstrate I can be ugly. I can be like at my absolute worst. And now look where you can get.
Yes,
And not as the hero, but as the survivor.
exactly. Yes. And I mean, that sharing that story in that way and being that vulnerable, it also allows others to be vulnerable for themselves. Because I think sometimes we're so afraid of the judgment and the perception
Yes.
that we just simply hide behind these masks in our lives. And if we can look up to someone and we can find something that we can identify in, then we can get that glimmer of hope. We can say, if Sarah can do it, I can do it. And this is for
Yeah.
anyone who is caught in the crossfires of any kind of trauma bonding that has to do with either self-destructive relationships, or for anyone that may have, like you, Sarah, the Mormon church sort of skew your worldview because of those
Right.
traumatic experiences that you've had.
Right. Because my dad utilized the Mormon church's teachings to justify what he was doing. Like I remember him very specifically saying, I was in a meeting and the stake president told me that, or told us that if something like this happened, this is what he would do to his kids. And the stake president is like, when you look at the Mormon hierarchy, it's kind of like a military chain of command.
Okay.
You've got your bishop,
Yeah.
which is very much like your pastor or your priest.
Mm-hmm.
And then your stake president is your leader over a geographical area, and he's in charge of 6 to 10 bishops. And so the stake
Okay.
president is the spiritual priesthood holder and leader that is supposed to be able to speak directly from God. And in my case, it was over the entire town of Snowflake, Arizona. So we're talking about the spiritual leader that's in charge of, I don't know, I think the population at the time I was there would have been somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 people when I was
Okay.
growing up in Snowflake. I think it was right around 6,000. And in my hometown, it was over 85% Mormon. And so
Okay.
you're walking around, pretty much everybody I knew was Mormon. Everybody was Mormon. So I grew up in a world where Mormonism was right, because there was nobody in my community who could comfortably say, hey, Mormonism's got some questionable things if you thought about it this way, because
Yeah.
everybody was Mormon. The cashier at the check register at the
Right.
grocery store,
Right.
Mormon. The one that bagged our groceries, Mormon. My doctor, well, actually, my doctor was one of the few not Mormon, but everybody he worked with,
Mm-hmm.
Mormon. My teachers at school, Mormon. The librarian, Mormon. The postmaster, Mormon. Like everybody
Right.
in my life is basically Mormon. And I think, the other thing is that when my dad was growing up, the prophet of the church, so now you're talking about, the direct mouthpiece. So
Yes.
Joseph Smith was the quote unquote prophet who
Okay.
quote unquote restored Mormonism, the only true church on the earth. So he's a prophet just as much as like Moses or Abraham is a prophet in the Bible. So
Yes.
the prophet of my dad's day and age is like Spencer W. Kimball, and he's got Boyd K. Packer, and so we call it the Kimball, McKay, Packer era, where those leaders are teaching my dad when he's a teenager and then into his early adult years that if you seek a mental health professional, if you seek psychological help, you're inviting the devil into your life because they manipulate your brain so Satan can come in and take over. And so that's really bad. And then
Mm-hmm.
they would have their own LDS behavioral. So it was LDS social services. LDS stands for Latter-day Saints. So Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS
Okay.
social services. So
Yeah.
it's basically the church's attempt at behavioral health. And it's only Mormon therapists are safe if
Right.
they're temple recommend worthy people. And if you're a temple recommend worthy Mormon, it
Mm-hmm.
means you're obeying all of the rules.
Right.
And
Yes.
so, but these are the only ones. And so then what you get is a lot of oversight of the church into what should be a medical evidence-based treatment. Now you have this arm that is, the Mormon church is saying, okay, you can do psychology as long as it fits within our rules and regulations, despite the fact that our rules and regulations have demonstrated that it increases anxiety, it increases depression, it
Yes.
increases body dysmorphia, it increases suicidal ideation.
And I
And
mean,
that's
do
just
they,
where it
Sarah,
is. Those are just
do,
facts.
yeah, Sarah, I mean, and sort of, do they keep any statistics and records on this? And I mean, one of the questions that I had, that's, I'm going to just leave that there for a minute. But as you were talking, one of the questions that I had was like, when you were in Snowflake, Arizona, and you think back to that time period now, is it sort of like going back in time? Like a completely different world?
Yes. Yes. So one of the benefits for me is that my mom is from New York, upstate New York. She's
Yes.
really not. She's from the East Coast because her dad was an Air Force navigator. So
Okay.
she grew up all over the
I like the East
eastern
Coast.
side of the United States. So she's from upstate. Which
Mhm.
she did high school in upstate New York, and then my dad is from
Oh,
LA.
wow.
And so we would spend our summers. They met at BYU Provo, and they did what we call the BYU I do, which is they went to Provo to BYU to get a
Oh,
bachelor's
wow.
degree and a
Okay.
spouse. So that's what they did. Um, my dad got his bachelor's degree in elementary education, and my mom got a spouse. So that's how that worked. And as soon as she got married, she dropped out of college because Mormon women in their day and age were not supposed to work. They were supposed to raise the kids, and the man was supposed to provide everything. Which whole new issue of oppression against women, which we won't go into unless you really, really want to.
Yeah,
but
we have a very
the
long
podcast would last like
if we
20
had to
hours.
unpack that.
Yes, it would be a very, very long day. So anyway, we would travel to New York where there were very few Mormons, or to LA where there were very few Mormons. And so one of the things that's really interesting, when I was growing up in Snowflake, we had maybe 2 Black families, several Hispanic and several Native American, because Snowflake is situated right between the Navajo Nation and the Apache Nation in the southwestern part of the United States. But again, most people were Mormon. So there was not a lot of diversity of thought. There was not a lot of diversity of culture or of ethnicity or of race. And then I would go to New York, and we would go to the inner city. So we did church at an inner city chapel that I think we shared with the Catholic Church. Like we would like meet in the basement of this Catholic church in Utica, New York. And all of a sudden, we have different culture, different religion, different ethnicity, diversity of thought. So I got, every summer, I would get this little taste of it. And then we would go to LA, and my dad's dad, well, actually, both of my dad's parents, they didn't necessarily, I think my dad's dad officially left Mormonism, and then his mom just did never go. And so we've got that diversity there. And we'd go to the stores, and I'm watching, people in all kinds of different cultures and religions and ethnicity, and listening to them. And so I got a little bit of that, which I'm so grateful for.
But it must have been such a wonderful experience for you.
Yes, but the majority of people in Snowflake don't really leave for a long period of time. And so really my diversity, my full diversity exposure came when my husband joined the United States Army. And then we traveled all over the United States. And I love the diversity. And that's been hugely beneficial because my husband and I are adoptive parents. And so our family is multi-ethnic.
Oh, congratulations.
And it's just such a beautiful thing. So I had a point earlier and I don't remember what it is. So it'll come back to me.
How many kids? How many kids do you have, Sarah?
Okay. I gave birth to 3. We just a couple weeks ago started the process of guardianship for my 16-year-old foster son. So we now have 8 children that are ours, that are forever children. And then we've been foster parents. So, I mean, goodness, I would have to sit down and count up how many kiddos we've had over the years, but that are ours forever now is 8. We have 8.
8 kids. Wow.
Yes.
But
yes, very Mormon thing to do.
It is a very, very Mormon thing to do. Mormon families, they do have lots of kids.
Right. Mormon or Catholic. Yes.
But I mean, it must be it's such I say easy experience, but simply because I often hear parents say that when you have more than 3 kids, then they say then it becomes easier because then the eldest looks after the youngest, and they keep each other occupied. So it's not something that is extremely time consuming because you can sort of leave them and they'll take care of themselves. You only do all the parent stuff. Is that true?
In some ways, yes. My children, except for my youngest 2, my children are best buddies. They love each other. But in some ways, absolutely not. When you start looking at, things like car insurance and paying to teach all these kids to drive, and then all of the extracurricular activities. And as my kids are teenagers, it has become overwhelming in a very different way. There's also not enough of mommy and daddy to always go around to meet some of those emotional needs. And my husband and I have tried very hard not to parentify our older children. So things like, yes, I have, 8 children. We've had several foster children. None of my children have ever changed their sibling's diaper, ever. Because in my opinion, they did not choose to have those siblings. That part is not their responsibility. The other thing is that the majority of the time, we pay our children to babysit. If you're babysitting, then dad and I are paying you.
And you're earning.
Correct. And it's usually for short periods of time, although as a summer. And then the other thing is that 4 of our kids, because the one we just adopted also has some special needs. So 4 of our 8 have very, very special needs. So like my 19-year-old was diagnosed with schizophrenia when he was very, very young. So the first time he was diagnosed with psychosis, he was 4, which is almost unheard of, but it was very apparent.
Because I would think that kind of a psychotic break only happens sort of around 18, 19.
Right. So his is organic, meaning there's issues within his brain structure that caused it. And it's in his genetic history. His biological father and then his maternal grandfather both had, they were on the psychotic spectrum. I think his birth father was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and his maternal grandfather was diagnosed with combined bipolar and schizophrenia, which is schizoaffective disorder. So he's got it in his he just kind of got the shit end of the, I don't know if I can say that on your podcast. He got the terrible end.
I'm going to have to just boop, explicit.
Sorry. So he got the bad end of the gene pool there. And then my youngest
and 19, and he's the eldest. He's your
No,
eldest.
my oldest is 22.
Okay.
And he's doing great. He's an auto mechanic. Okay. He works for BMW. He loves to diagnose
what
cars.
A good company to work
for. He's doing great. And then he's also going back to school for business and finance. So my oldest is doing great. And then my 19-year-old is disabled, and he lives next door to us. And my husband and I have permanent guardianship of him to make sure he gets his meds and that he does all the things that he can do so he's not a menace or danger to society. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. And then my youngest 2 are both on the autism spectrum. So when you add in the special needs.
The youngest 2, so are they twins or are they just close in age?
10 and 8 and both adopted. So we adopted the 10-year-old. We brought her home when she was 4 days old. Yeah. And then my 8-year-old, we took custody of him right before his 3rd birthday. And he is now 8. He's been with us for 5 years. So great kids. We love them. Those 2 fight like crazy. Those 2, they're the sibling rivalry between the youngest 2. Y'all, if I had dealt with that with the first 2, I probably would have only had 3 or 4 kids instead of 8. So, but yeah. Oh,
that's
I remember.
Wonderful.
I remember
what I was with such a beautiful family.
Thank you. I remember what I was going to say earlier. You were speaking about being a voice for others to model. And I wanted to say that that's the primary reason that I wrote the book, is I wanted to demonstrate you can talk about the ugliest, worst things that you have done in an open way, because that is the path to healing. And that doesn't mean write a book about it and share it on social media and make it public knowledge the way that Sarah has. That is not for everybody. And I honor that. But when you can openly speak about how your trauma has influenced your behavior in such a way that you are behaving or thinking or doing things that are not true to who you want to be, that talking about it out loud with somebody you trust has to occur for healing. And so in my book, as you read that, you are going to see me talk about how I ended up in an affair, and every reader is going to be like, why are you doing that, Sarah? Duh, stop. That's terrible. Stop. Yeah. And I couldn't stop myself. I didn't have the skills in 2004 to stop it. I couldn't. I didn't know how. And as I wrote that, even me, I'm like, why did you do this, Sarah? Oh my goodness. This is like, you would tell people, like, if I had been giving counsel to my best friend in the situation I was in, I'd have been like, yeah, don't do that. Yes. But I was still doing it. Yeah. And so as I talk about that, I want to illustrate you find healing as you can share your most vulnerable moments with somebody that you trust implicitly, who has your back, who can help you heal from that. That's what I hope to be as a counselor in my own clinic. And I
Yeah.
love the work of Brene Brown because she talks about the same thing, which is you got to find somebody that you can be completely vulnerable with that won't shame you for it so that
Yeah.
you can achieve healing. It is one of the first steps to healing. So that is why I
Mhm.
wrote the book, to say, if I can talk about it and I can put it in a book for you to read, you can go
Yeah.
find your person and talk about it. It's
You
okay.
know, I'm thinking that when we suffered and endured so much trauma during our childhood, our adolescent years, and we carry that with us, and you know, we get to a point where we, like you say, we have to heal from it. Do you have any tips on how we build healthy relationships? I think that is such a challenging thing to do. How do we build
Mhm.
healthy relationships that is built on trust, that is built on respect, and you know, that unconditional love? Because I'm listening to your suffering, and you know, the trust was broken from such a young age. There was all this neglect, there was a conditional love that was offered. And so how do you break free from that and build healthy relationships?
Right. I think the first step is recognizing trauma changes your brain. So the amygdala in our brain is our survival mechanism. It's the thing that keeps us alive. It's that somebody says something that hurts our feelings and I'm going to claw your eyes out because of it. That's your amygdala taking over your rational, logical brain space. It's your, what's more commonly known, the fight, flight, freeze response. And then we have
Yeah.
added on the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response there.
Mm-hmm.
And so number one, recognize that trauma changes your brain. So in my case, I have complex PTSD. If you were to put my
Mm-hmm.
brain in a brain scan, you're likely to see that my amygdala is oversized and that my hippocampus is smaller. And the hippocampus is the control center. It's the part of the brain that's like, oh, this is coming in. That bit of information goes there. This bit of information goes over there. This bit of information goes over there. And the amygdala tends to reroute how information is received and how the body responds to it. It kind of takes over that hippocampus when it flares up because it goes much
Mm-hmm.
faster. So number one, you've
Yeah.
got to recognize that chronic trauma or trauma can change your brain. Now, change does not mean broken. It doesn't mean
Mm-hmm.
bad. But as you are
Yeah.
able to identify how
Mm-hmm.
your responses that you have a hard time controlling in the moment. If I don't actually believe that you can control them in the moment. I feel like you have to do a lot of healing and then the control and the change comes later. But as you address that and you give yourself some grace for being kind of dumb sometimes or being really emotional sometimes, you got to be gentle with yourself and recognize my brain has been trained to do it this way. And it can't
Yeah.
be untrained without a lot of work and a lot of effort. So, number one, cut yourself some slack and go figure out how to get that healed. And there are so many books on this now. There are so many podcasts that talk about this now. You don't have to
Yeah.
always invest a lot of money to learn these resources and learn how to, in a lot of ways, rehabilitate yourself. Now, I will say you need a professional if you are dealing with a lot of suicidal ideation or homicidal ideation, if you're self-harming, or if you have some significant mental health issues that are just interfering with your ability to function, please, you need somebody who is clinically trained to help you work through that. Then
Yeah.
the other piece is in your relationship, you and your partner need to both be on the same page of being safe for each other. And really, where I kind of lucked out is that when my husband and I got married, both of us come from really toxic relationship patterns in our parents. For my husband, there was a lot of domestic violence. There was a lot of finance control. There was a lot of like bipolar and mood instability, and then just significant depression.
Mm-hmm.
And then on my side, we have
Yeah.
the personality disorders and the bad anxiety and the bad depression. And so when we married, we were like, we don't want to have what our parents had. We don't want that. And we will do everything in our power to not do that to our children. And this wasn't our parents are criminal. How dare they? They're awful and we're better than them. It was
Yes.
more along the lines
Yeah.
of, I love you enough to never want to treat you that way, no matter what's going on in my personal life. And we want
Yeah.
our kids to not struggle with us the way we struggle with our parents. And so when you have two or more partners that are consistently working on self-improvement and being a safe place for their partner or partners, then you have an environment that is rich for developing healthy relationship attachments, for overcoming the trauma. An example is just last night. So my husband did some individual therapy, and he had this realization that in 2004, when I cheated on him because of our Mormon upbringing, he didn't feel like he had a choice that would have allowed him to divorce me. It was like, you're Mormon. This is forever. You were married in the temple. These are the steps to fix it. I'm not leaving you because that's wrong. So he said, if I went back, I wouldn't have, I would have still chosen to stay married to you, Sarah, but it would have been my choice instead of an obligation because of my religious upbringing.
Right.
And then
Right.
that opened up for me to be able to say, I, to this day, feel intense shame that you, in a way, got hoodwinked into marrying me, because I was instructed by my family, don't tell Mason you're not a virgin, because if he knows that you had sex before him, he won't want you anymore because you're dirty and you're used up, and then he's going to know that there's something wrong with you. So don't tell him. So my husband knew nothing about my trauma or about my high school sweetheart or about any of those things. He didn't know any of that when we got married. And we both can say out loud, if he had known, he probably would have chosen not to marry me. And he says, to my everlasting shame, I know that about me. And, so in some ways I'm happy I didn't know, because we've done so well together. But last night I was able to say, you also didn't have a choice when it came to marrying me, because you didn't know everything. So there was no informed consent. Like, if you had known that you weren't my first, if you had known these things, then you would have had the opportunity to make a different choice. And it was a very emotional conversation. We were both crying. It was almost like, ooh, should we have talked about this? And then this morning, we woke up and we said, our choice was taken away, but look at what we've done since then. And we're really proud of this. And we're grateful that today we still choose each other. There is no way.
And that's important.
And there's no way
That's important to actually choose that person for yourself and to choose them every day.
And we would not have been able to have that type of a vulnerable conversation, which opened up both of us to healing and correcting past faults, if he and I did not feel safe together. So I think that healing really comes from being in a relationship where your partner is safe for you. You are safe for your partner. So your partner needs to be safe for you. You need to be safe for your partner. And you both need to be in the brain space of, what can we do to nurture and build and grow and heal? And if you can do that together, the healing comes as you learn the resources and you grow together. And that's where I love my husband, because he has made that a priority. And I would not have written that book, and I would not be as healthy as I am today if he had not been safe for me.
And that's beautiful. And I'm so happy just listening to you speak. I can hear that you bubble when you speak about your husband and the life that you have. But, it takes that work. It takes that effort. It takes that continuous willingness to choose your partner and to show up for yourself and that person every day. And, I also think that There comes a point in your life when you have to also relinquish the past. You have to say, I'm not no longer going to carry all of these traumatic experiences with me and make it part of my daily life. I understand that it exists within me. It is part of who I am. But I can look at it and I can say, I know that you once existed in me, and I know where you live now, and you live in my past. You have no place in my future anymore.
Yes, I love that. That's beautiful. And I think that we can achieve that when we feel like our emotional
Yes.
wounds have been heard, validated, and understood. Once we can do that for ourselves, and once our partners or somebody that is safe for us can do that for us, then I think the natural byproduct of that healing is it no longer haunts me. It doesn't have any power over me anymore because I was seen in a safe,
that's the core.
emotional
Those words of
way.
yours, Sarah, it cuts to the core. Sarah, it's been wonderful speaking to you. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. You've educated me so much on the Mormon Church, the faith itself, home life, growing up in the Mormon Church. It's not something that I've been exposed to. So thank you so much for educating me and the listeners through sharing your experiences. We appreciate that. And thank you for the work that you do in your practice, how you've managed to turn your experiences into something positive for others. I can only commend you on what you've achieved. And once again, congratulations on Trauma Bonded. Thank you for bringing this book to the world.
Absolutely. It has been an honor and a privilege to talk to you today. And I am so grateful at the response that my book has received in the few short months that it has been out. The reviews, I just want to say, as people have left reviews on their favorite book buying platform, as I've read those and as I've received emails of people saying, you have given me so much hope and so much courage, it makes my heart sing, because that's what I want. I'm not trying to hurt my parents. I'm not trying to bash the Mormon Church. I'm trying to help the world feel hope and courage in their darkest, ugliest moments. And so just thank you so much to the listeners and to the readers who have spoken out and given that piece to me. It has just been a beautiful, it's been hard. Writing that book's the hardest thing I've ever done, for sure. But it has been a beautiful and uplifting experience to see that my book has had such a positive impact on so many. So thank you so much, Marlene, for this opportunity. I deeply appreciate it.
You are very welcome. And remember, you are welcome back here on the podcast at any time.
I would love to come back anytime. Just reach out.
I am going to put the link to your book in the description box, as well as all your social media links, so the listeners can know where to find you and check out your website and head over to probably Amazon to get your book. So I'll leave all of those links in the description box below, and you guys are more than welcome to reach out and to follow Sarah on her social media pages and go and get her book. Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. The book is available on any platform where you can buy books. So Amazon is a great place. If you're not a fan of Amazon, it's also available with like Barnes and Noble and book hubs. And there's lots of places you can get it pretty much anywhere. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
That wraps up this podcast episode. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy my podcast, please take a minute to give me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast directory so you don't miss an episode. Please consider following My Centered Life on Facebook and Instagram for daily inspiration. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. You can catch me again in the next episode. Same time, same place. Sending you lots of love and light. Bye.